He thought he was just doing the right thing, helping an elderly woman stranded by the roadside, while the afternoon sun beat down on the hood of her car. No cameras, no audience, just a small act of kindness. But minutes later, that same moment of compassion would cost him everything. His boss would rage, a crowd would whisper, and one man's good deed would turn into a lesson about something far uglier than a workplace dispute. Because what happened in that garage wasn't just about a job lost. It was about a truth too many still refuse to see. How could helping someone lead to this?
Marcus had grease on his hands and pride in his work. For 10 years, he'd been the guy who never cut corners, the mechanic customers trusted even when others grumbled under their breath. The shop smelled of oil and metal, a second home where he tuned engines like a musician tuning notes. He didn't talk much about it, but every paycheck went toward his daughter's future, a quiet investment in hope. Yet beneath the hum of wrenches and the rhythm of routine, something uneasy always lingered, not from the engines, but from the looks, the ones that lasted a second too long, the jokes that weren't really jokes. He learned to let it slide, until one slow afternoon when a broken-down car at the edge of the lot and the woman behind its wheel would test every bit of that patience and change everything. The afternoon heat pressed down as Marcus wiped his hands on a rag, squinting toward the edge of the lot, where a battered sedan sat half on the gravel, hood trembling with steam. Most of the crew ignored it. Another stranded driver, probably waiting for roadside assistance. But Marcus noticed the driver, an elderly woman gripping the steering wheel, face drawn with worry, hazard lights blinking like a silent plea. He hesitated only a second before walking over, grabbing his toolbox as he went. The old woman smiled faintly, relief softening her face as he opened her hood. "Looks like your radiator's giving out," he said gently, trying to calm her shaking hands. He didn't see harm in helping. It was what he'd been raised to do. Inside the shop, a group of coworkers watched through the dusty window. A few chuckled, trading smirks that Marcus had learned to ignore. "There he goes again," one muttered. They didn't like how customers preferred Marcus. Some hated it quietly, others loudly. And when the shop manager returned from lunch and saw him outside kneeling beside a customer he hadn't been assigned, his expression hardened. Later, in the break room, the air turned thick. "You think you can just walk off a job to play hero?" the manager snapped. Marcus tried explaining she was in distress right outside our lot, but the manager's words sliced through his defense. "You're supposed to know your place." The phrase hung between them like smoke. Marcus stared, realizing it wasn't about policy. It was about something older, colder. By the end of the day, a call came that barely lasted 30 seconds. "We're letting you go," the manager said flatly. No formal warning, no discussion, just dismissal. The reason sounded rehearsed, sterile, unauthorized work during hours. Marcus sat in his car, numb. Through the windshield, he could see the shop sign gleaming in fading daylight, the place he'd spent a decade building his name, now closed to him. He thought about his little girl waiting at home and how he'd explain losing his job for helping someone's grandmother. The more he repeated it in his head, the less sense it made. But the story wasn't over. A few days later, a black Mercedes rolled into the same shop. The same elderly woman stepped out, only now she wasn't wearing worry. She moved with quiet authority, walking straight to the manager's office. And though Marcus wasn't there to see it, the moment would send ripples through that place, turning whispers to panic and revealing exactly who she really was. Marcus's act of kindness had been punished, but what came next would expose something far greater than one man's prejudice. It would lay bare what happens when judgment blinds compassion and remind everyone watching that some lessons come with a reckoning.
The moment the elderly woman stepped into the manager's office, the entire shop seemed to hold its breath. Workers straightened up, glancing at one another, unsure what was happening. Everyone recognized her, but not as a random customer. She was Mrs. Holloway, the mother of the shop's owner, a woman whose opinion carried more weight than any contractor title. Her voice cut through the low hum of whispering mechanics, calm but sharp, like glass. "I came here last week when my car broke down by your gate," she said. The manager nodded quickly, eyes shifting. "Yes, ma'am, I heard. Unfortunate timing," he stammered. She didn't smile. "Unfortunate," she echoed. "Is that the only word you have for firing the man who stopped to help me while the rest of your employees watched?" Everyone froze. The air thickened with guilt and disbelief. The manager's confident tone evaporated as he realized who she was. "Ma'am, I didn't know," he began, but she interrupted with a slow shake of her head. "You didn't care to know," she said. Word spread fast. Within hours, the owner himself stormed into the garage, face flushed with a mix of confusion and anger. The truth unraveled piece by piece. Marcus, the man they'd fired, had been the only one to show her kindness when others turned their backs. And the man who fired him had sneered at her own mother without a clue. As Marcus stood in the doorway, called back by the owner's urgent request, every eye turned. The same floor where he'd packed his things now felt like a stage. The manager's face drained of color, while the owner extended his hand not just to apologize, but to set things right. In that instant, Marcus saw it clearly, how easily dignity could be stripped away, and how swiftly the truth could drag hidden prejudice into the light. What came next would decide whether this was justice or just damage control.
The next morning, Marcus returned to the shop, not as a man begging for forgiveness, but as one demanding respect that had been denied for far too long. The owner apologized publicly, reinstated him, and dismissed the manager whose prejudice had poisoned the place. There were handshakes, promises of learning experiences, and uneasy smiles from coworkers who now spoke softly around him. On paper, justice was served, but Marcus knew the deeper bruises wouldn't fade so easily. He worked quietly for the rest of the week, greeting the same customers, turning the same boats, but something inside him had shifted. Kindness had cost him his job, yet it had also forced people to face a truth they pretended not to see. The eyes that once looked past him now held something else. Guilt, maybe, or awakening. Either way, the silence felt different. When Mrs. Holloway stopped by one last time to thank him, she pressed his hand and whispered, "You changed more than just a tire that day." Her words stayed with him, echoing long after she drove away. In the end, Marcus didn't see himself as a hero. He was just a man who tried to do what was right and was punished for it until the truth refused to stay buried. His story exposed how racism doesn't always scream. Sometimes it hides in policies, in tone, in the comfort of pretending it's just business. And while Marcus's ending brought closure, too many others never get that chance. Too many stories end quietly, off camera, unaddressed. So maybe the real question isn't whether justice can be done after the fact. It's why it takes being caught, being humiliated, or being exposed for people to see our shared humanity. Because one act of decency shouldn't have to prove anyone's worth.